Welcome to Full Speed Ahead. I'm Craig Fuller here with LB Harvey. LB is the Chief Revenue Officer of Front, an organization that's helping optimize the communications in a modern office. You guys are big into logistics. You've been working inside this industry. It's an industry with a lot of coordination and communication. LB, tell us a little bit more about Front. Give us a little background.
Yeah. Thanks, Craig. By the way, thrilled to be here. So thank you for the invitation. Just to give a little bit of background on Front. So what are we? We are a customer communication platform that really is built for modern businesses, but specifically, we work, as you mentioned, a lot with logistics and transportation teams. What we really allow you to do is to bring all of your customer messaging and apps into a single space and pair them with native internal collaboration, so that every person in your organization can be part of the customer journey and can impact the customer experience. So we work with a lot of top logistics and transportation companies, SSY, Gulfwinds, MNX, Jarrett, Edge, Convoy, Flexport, et cetera, and 6,000 general companies out there. And businesses rely on us to be able to connect well with their customers, namely relieving all of the email clutter, the reply alls, the distribution lists, et cetera, and move to something that's much more streamlined, organized, that allows you to really collaborate behind the scenes and get your customers what they need.
Now, there are a lot of tools out there that provide communications that are in this sort of ecosystem that is this sort of modern office and cloud-based office. The way I think of this, LB, if I think of it correctly, is Slack is really good for an internal use of communicating of internal purposes, but really where Front comes in is it extends that universe to participants outside of your four walls. So customers that want to be involved in it, capacity providers if you're in logistics and you've got trucking providers and ocean providers and brokerage entities that you're trying to coordinate with. This brings all of those together in this workspace, but they have essentially their own sort of private experience with the communications. Sort of the benefit of what email in terms of ubiquity, but still very private network. If I'm working on a project, I can bring a couple of people coordinate, but it's just for that one particular project.
I think that's spot on. The challenge, and by the way, there's definitely a place for business messengers, for Slack, for other tools. However, what Front allows you to do is actually keep a lot of the communication and collaboration inside a platform that your entire company and your customers are already using, which is email. Right. So there's just a lot of streamlining that happens when you're not trying to go from platform to platform, and you can actually just seamlessly copy folks in. You can have actually kind of sidebar conversations to make sure that you're collaborating internally to get the right answer out externally to your customer, et cetera. And, you know, in an alternative world where you don't have Front, you're having to do that all on different channels and copy and paste or forward emails, which is a very clunky experience. So yes, it's super seamless because we're meeting customers and your internal teammates in a platform they're already in, email.
And there's so many, I mean, just in transportation logistics, there's so much email activity. It's an industry where everything, really at the end of the day, when you're managing a logistics operation, you're really focused on the exceptions. Most freight transactions go off without exceptions, but the ones that require most of the work are the ones that drive a lot of the exceptions, where there's an issue or a challenge, and having to go back into your email and find the references and documentation of where something needs to be resolved is a very encumbersome task and very inefficient.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we hear a lot from specifically our logistics companies is that it can just be really easy to get caught in the flood of email. A lot of distribution lists are ineffective because they don't really allow a ton of accountability or clarity on who's responding when to a customer. As you mentioned, you often have to go kind of searching back through and, a deluge of email to find the really salient points. and Front really allows you to make that process a lot more seamless and ultimately route the right conversations to the right internal team members without everyone having to be on the distribution list. It sunsets the idea of what a lot of our logistics customers call the unwelcome or unwanted reply all that just further clogs up boxes. And we've seen some really great results. The logistics companies that use us have often been able to dramatically decrease their time to respond to customers, often under an hour, from benchmarks of 3 to 4 prior to using Front. We've reduced just the volume of email in some of our logistics and transportation companies by something like 80%, which has just given hours and hours back to team members to actually do real work versus sort of shifting through all of the noise.
I'm glad you mentioned the reply all. As someone who's been in logistics my whole life, it is, and there's different levels of technical knowledge and expertise, particularly among some of the carriers, where you may have people who aren't as familiar with email or email etiquette that are replying to all because they think that's what they should do. And it's an environment where it's a mess. And, I have a habit of saving every single email, but I don't open up every email because a lot of it's just updates. Coming from a logistics and dispatch operation, I'm used to getting in my inbox hundreds of alerts a day, and I just let them rest. In fact, I have this is not an exaggeration, I have 180,972 unread emails in my inbox, a habit which now I'm in a media business, I should have gotten rid of that habit of letting old emails still stay there. I do it because it's been built and bred in me in this habit that I gained 20 years ago being in freight, and I just unfortunately have not adapted. Sounds like I need Front.
I was going to say we got to get you on Front, Craig.
Let's do it. So LB, you joined the industry. You're not from transportation. You've been at Front for 6 months. You were at Intercom, which is also a cloud-based workflow tool that brings people to collaborate. And then you were at LinkedIn before, and you actually set up the first SDR group there at LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a tool that it's ubiquitous in all of our lives, for better or worse. I have found that when I first started this company, I actually credit a lot of FreightWaves' success to my understanding of how to sort of navigate LinkedIn. But as we have gotten and become more successful, my audience has certainly grown, but it's become a real mess of sorts for me because I'm getting all these inbound requests and I don't know I need Front for LinkedIn. How do I fix that with all that noise that comes in that inbox? Why is the messenger so broken in LinkedIn?
Yeah, look, I'm a longtime LinkedIn fan. I think, when I think about my career, I can't help but be so incredibly grateful for the 7 years I spent there. And talk about innovative technology that really came in and disrupted a market across multiple fronts, right? Not just the talent market, but also how we think about selling in the modern day. It's a great place to be able to connect with folks in the business world. I often start my morning scanning the news just to hear from ex-colleagues, current colleagues, what's going on, et cetera. And I can also totally commiserate with the fact that when I go in to check my LinkedIn messaging, I would say 5% are folks that I want to speak with and engage with, and the other 95% are random folks trying to connect and or pretty spammy sales outreach. So I'm with you. I don't know that I have the perfect solve, but I don't disagree that that's a real challenge on the messaging side. And the kind of bummer on that is that it can lead you to miss the messages you actually want.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I get messages, I'm 90 to 100 a day sometimes. And the problem is I will get a message and it comes in at the right time and I just happen to notice it and I'll read it. And it was this conversation where somebody that I would want to connect with has been trying to connect with me on 3 to 4 different messages, and I completely miss their earlier messages because I'm literally on the weekends going through and opening every one, accepting, or declining. And it's a mess. And I hope Microsoft fixes this. They paid a lot of money for LinkedIn. They've got an opportunity to do it. I certainly hope they make the investments to make it a much more effective tool than it is today because it has so much power.
Yeah, you always wonder, is there some way that you could start flagging folks who routinely just connect with random folks?
Spam,
Yeah,
spammy stuff. Yeah.
spammy type behavior. I don't know. There's hopefully some big product brains at Microsoft are thinking about it. To your point, because it it's a great tool.
It's an amazing tool.
Yep.
It's an amazing tool, but it needs some maintenance. Hopefully, maybe the folks at LinkedIn will hear me talk about this, or you as a former LinkedIn colleague talk about, hey, we really want you. We trust that you'll do it. LB, this work from home environment is, it's exciting because I would tell you, we're a year into COVID quarantine. Like, we've passed the year mark, at least in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Which took, certainly wasn't the most aggressive in terms of restrictions compared to places like San Francisco where you live. But there was this sense of energy that I have not seen out and about that seems to exist here, about people just realize that this quarantine, this COVID element looks to be in the rearview mirror. Are you also sensing that?
Just in terms of a shift of mentality and some optimism around,
the energy of people, the optimism of people. Is there a sense in San Francisco that's the same case, or?
For me personally, yes. I have not followed the news as aggressively as I have since the outbreak of COVID, and really I've been kind of watching the vaccine news like a hawk. And actually one of my favorite authors out of the New York Times is a guy named David Leonhardt. And he's giving a very pragmatic, real view of kind of the COVID situation, vaccine news, et cetera. So I'm personally feeling a huge sense of optimism. And I think fellow optimists in San Francisco are. I think it's, one of the points that David Leonhardt makes is that there's probably been some misconceptions out there, both in not taking the coronavirus threat as seriously as we probably should have, especially at the kind of start. And then there's also a counterweight of people at this point not latching onto the optimism and probably still being a little bit down about the what the future holds, and some sort of non-optimistic projections of life won't return to normal until 2022, et cetera. So I'm starting to feel and see more people out and about. We're starting to talk about, hey, could we get back into the office in the fall? These things were unclear, a couple of months ago. But I would still love to see more people leaning into some of the optimism and really looking at the science, because I think the vaccines have been pretty incredible.
It is certainly, in many ways, a miracle in itself, as fast as it. The government deserves a lot of flack for how the ineffectiveness of their rollout. But the vaccines are certainly an example of where science is going to win this battle. It's certainly given me a lot of optimism, my family, as well as, I think there's a sense, at least in our industry, because we're an industry that's we call it the always responders, is, we're at the front end. If you recall last year, we were delivering, as an industry, delivering toilet paper and meats and personal protective equipment and chartering flights out of China to get all this stuff here, being involved in the vaccine rollout. And then now thinking about all of this economic activity and the chaos that the global shipping industry has become, with all of those containers sitting off the coast of California and all of the demand for trucking services. I think our industry sort of feels this on a daily basis. But I'm curious, as a workflow tool, where are you guys seeing a lot of interest in this sort of post-COVID quarantine? How are people thinking about these tools and incorporating it in their workflows? Do you anticipate that this work from home environment is going to stay fairly persistent, or there's going to be a hybrid model? Or what does the world from your purview look like?
I think it's going to be really interesting. My prediction is that some companies, and some companies have already come out and said we'll never force people back into an office. I think Facebook has taken a pretty liberal work from home, remote going forward. Twitter, there have been some big brands that have come out and said, work will never return to the way it was. I think a lot of companies are going to opt for hybrid models. I think very few companies will try to go back to the classic 9 to 5, or maybe it's more like 8 to 6, 5 days a week in the office. I think actually that's going to be pretty inhibitive in terms of attracting candidates, because I think people have gotten used to A, more flexibility in their life, B, they've liked the time back, not commuting, and C, some of the old adages around you got to be in the office to get work done have been proven incorrect in extremity. I personally am pretty excited about a hybrid approach. I love the idea of working 1 or 2 days a week from home, and I love the idea of getting back into the office. I think on a macro level, I suspect that some of the full remote will revert. And I don't know if it's in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time. But I think that it's ultimately hard to move and shake as fast as, at least here in tech, we like to, without those in-person connections, especially for startups. I think when you're a big brand like a Twitter or Facebook, and so much is being distributed anyways, and you've got a huge machine to onboard people into your culture and your product and the work, that's really different. I think for early stage to moderate to even late stage startups, I predict that hybrid will be the way forward, and I think people who are going more extreme may pull that back over time.
It's interesting. I had this conversation today with the local Chamber of Commerce, and Chattanooga is certainly not San Francisco. It's not even Chicago or Atlanta, bigger markets. It's a city that has a lot of industrial manufacturing, but also has a lot of logistics services. And they have talked to a lot of companies about the future of work. And it was interesting because they had these different cohorts of large established Fortune 1000 CEOs they meet with, and then they have fast-growing companies, myself, FreightWaves included. And it was interesting as I was talking to them about what they're hearing. My assumption was the bigger companies want people to come back into the office, and the smaller companies are more agile. That wasn't the case. What they said was that they found out in their studies that the correlation of whether companies wanted to be all in the office or allow a hybrid model or work from home first happened to do with the level of tenure of their employee base. So companies that are hiring a lot of people right out of college prefer the in-office experience because culturally there's a lot of habits, a lot of sort of tribal knowledge that you gain in those first couple of years of work, that if it was remote, it's very difficult to get and gain for those. But if you have a more seasoned workforce that has been in the workforce for 20, 30 years, even if the company is young, we're a young company, but most of our staff has been in the workforce. We don't hire a lot right out of college. They've been in the workforce for a couple of years. It's interesting because there isn't as much pressure in my mind because people, with all these tools, we can hold them accountable. We can track performance. We can provide incentives and coaching that doesn't require them to come in the office.
Yeah, I totally believe that. I mean, I think there's also just a different level of expectation. When I think about folks that are a bit earlier in their careers, and I'm, even call it the first 10 years out of school, not just the first 2. I think there's also an enhanced desire, at least in a lot of tech hubs, to have a social element to work. And I think that's hard to replicate out of the office versus people who are a bit more tenured and may have families, et cetera, may want that day or two in the office to connect. But in general, they've got a lot of other things to balance and blend. And, they're probably not looking for their core social group to also be their work colleagues at that point in their lives. So I totally believe that. I think beyond even tenure as a proxy for how experienced your staff or your team are, I think that there's also probably something around very quickly growing companies that are going to be hiring a lot of new folks. And I know we're looking to go from about 200 folks to about 350 by the end of the year. That's a lot of folks to onboard remotely. That's a lot of folks who you don't get to like meet and experience. It's a lot of folks who can't just like turn to a colleague at a desk next to them and ask a question. So I think one of the things that was a bit imperfect about this experiment, if you will, the last year on working remote, kind of forced on us by the coronavirus, is in many cases you saw companies who had groups of people used to working together and had the opportunity to work together in an office then go distribute. And so what I think is going to be interesting, and why I predict that we may see a little bit rollback of the tide, is that as companies go from 200 to 400 to 600 to 800 folks, as a lot of tech companies aspire to, I think it's really hard to build that culture and onboard folks successfully to that culture fully remote.
Yeah, I think high growth is a great example. It's interesting. Reid Hoffman's Blitzscaling book talks a lot about the stages of growth and stages of companies. And you think about a company that goes, you talked about going from 200 to 350. It's a different stage of what your company looks like when you're adding 150 people. Even earlier stages, when you go from 50 to say 150 people in a year, it's difficult because we throughout society, evolutionary, aren't built for that kind of social engagement and growth. And it's difficult when you're coming, particularly for people that are coming into the organization, to figure out there's all these sort of nuances in a work environment of what they say in an HR presentation is different than what the culture actually is. And oftentimes, if you only hear and see things on a screen, you don't really know those nuances. Whether you've been in the business for 10 years or right out of college, you don't know those nuances until you're in the office and you're seeing how everybody else interacts.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, it was a really interesting, I read an interesting article, I can't remember if it was in the Atlantic or New York Times, some publication that talked about how, especially for folks earlier in their career, getting to experience and feel the nuance of culture and how you kind of operate and really get things done, and not having that experience in the office is going to set that generation back a bit, because there's just stuff that is hard to grok in a presentation or on screen or over Slack or even email, which I think is a great communication platform. Can't replace in person.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. I do think you can have a hybrid model where you allow people to come in for social activities and still work. But it is more difficult where you're hiring people that are outside of, for you guys, outside of San Francisco, if they moved, outside of the city itself into different parts of California. I have friends that have worked at big tech companies out there that were in San Francisco that have now relocated to Napa Valley or into Tahoe or all over California.
Yeah.
It's a different world. I'm curious, as a San Francisco native or someone who lives in San Francisco, I don't know if you're native to the area.
Chicago, born and raised in Chicago, but I've been here for 11 years.
So you sort of have the passport, you have a visa, you're a citizen of San Francisco. We read a lot, I think in some ways, people outside of San Francisco sort of cheer on the fact that Austin and Miami are these emerging venture capital and tech cities. Do you think that the San Francisco story is over with? Or do you think this is just another chapter in the evolution of the city?
Yeah, well, I'm probably biased. I don't think San Francisco's over with. I don't think San Francisco or Silicon Valley will ever be replaced in our lifetime as the innovation hub. Great to see Miami and Austin, and I think Chicago actually is another kind of emerging hub in the tech scene. New York's got some great tech too. There's obviously global hubs, Paris, Tel Aviv, Dublin. Talk about, wow, a country that has done an amazing job attracting a tech scene.
Ireland?
Yeah. Sorry.
Well,
Dublin,
Stripe.
Dublin, the country. Dublin, Ireland. But yes, Ireland, the country. I think, well, Stripe and actually Intercom was founded there, but they've done a great job of attracting even U.S. or internationally headquartered companies to come and build their European operations out of there, and have created so many jobs. So I'm all for emerging hubs, but I don't think that Silicon Valley or San Francisco are going anywhere.
Well, I do think that the distribution of talent, the distribution of wealth, of investment is a positive for everyone, regardless of what the next great tech city, innovation city is. As it relates to front interactions in logistics and transportation, it's a workflow coordination tool that brings a lot of efficiencies into these operations. Where are you guys seeing the most successful implementations? Where are people having the biggest impact when they implement front in their operations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's across a couple of different categories. I'll name just a couple. One, we do a lot for organizations around operational efficiency. So the ability to route the right conversations to the right team members very quickly. Ultimately, we give a lot of teammates time back, as I mentioned, in kind of our logistics use case, if you will, being able to reduce email by 80%, even if you're just going through and deleting, saves you a lot of time, and it allows you to actually focus on the emails that matter most, and therefore gets a lot of time back in your day. If you can save something like 6 hours a week, not having to declutter your email. There's a lot of enhanced visibility and accountability. So companies who use Front have a lot more control to understand like who's on a playing point, to be actually responding to a customer or prospective customer. There's a whole enhanced collaboration about being able to pull in the right teammates behind the scenes, and then be able to give a credible answer back quickly. And then just the ability to really measure your business by understanding how many conversations are going to your average team member, things like your time to first response, et cetera. So we're giving a lot of power and data and insights back to businesses. And ultimately, really what we're trying to drive is better operational efficiency, a better customer experience, and ultimately more revenue to your bottom line. I'll also mention that, I was just going to say, the one other thing I'll mention is it's a bit softer, but we believe that people who are actually using and leveraging Front work happier as well. No one enjoys decluttering or deleting reply alls or seeing a bunch of emails that they do nothing with and don't need, because you still know how many emails are in your inbox. It's weighing on your mind at some level, and so really to be able to kind of start your day feeling in control of your queue and your work, I think is a really empowering feeling for folks.
I take my 180,000 as a badge of honor for the record. I think that's
a lot.
But when I miss important emails, just like when I miss important LinkedIn messages, it does bother me. I take it like, why did I miss this really important message? Particularly when there are people that I care to respond to, which always makes it difficult. In terms of logistics companies are always focused on number of transactions per rep. It's a big KPI, a very important KPI, particularly the ones that don't have assets. I imagine that productivity starts to show up in those stats as well.
Yeah, we have a great customer story from a company called Edge Logistics, and they're out of Chicago. They're just under 90 folks. They've been a long-term customer of Front and Real Power users, and their CEO, Will Kerr, will tell you that when their team started using Front, it was the first time that they were actually able to track revenue per teammate. And they were able, one, to start creating more accountability on where conversations getting routed, and again, who's on point, as opposed to sort of these distribution lists where you can kind of get lost in who's actually responsible for responding to a prospect or customer. And then two, with the analytics and reporting that Front comes with, he was actually able to start tracking, revenue per agent or per team member, and really he was able to track fact that I think we increased their revenue per agent by something like 17% against their old baseline, which was great to see. A, the ability to actually measure, B, the increased accountability and sort of visibility, and then 3, obviously, who doesn't like to see revenue per teammate go up?
And Will's a badass. We love Will. Will's a friend of FreightWaves, a friend of mine. So what Will says, it must work. He's a smart, savvy operator in the business, and certainly looking for new technologies to implement across their business. But a lot of energy. Talking about Chicago. Chicago's been an emerging market for not even emerging. They are the established leader for logistics. Startups and establishments, they certainly play an outsized role. What else are you seeing in terms of how organizations are thinking about their future in logistics in terms of work from home? You think this will all revert back to people being in the office in logistics because it is so intensive in terms of coordination?
I think that Look, I'm not in the logistics industry, so I don't want to speak authoritatively on behalf. I can't imagine that some of the same trends we're seeing across the globe of hybrid and an enhanced expectation for flexibility won't continue even in the logistics space. So it may not be a full-blown remote strategy, but I can't imagine that there won't be an enhanced expectation from team members on the ability to work from home occasionally or be able to do more things asynchronously. And I know even for logistics and transportation companies, while there is a lot of coordination and collaboration, I imagine as operations expand, multiple offices emerge. And I know some of the logistics and transportation companies we've worked with, one of the powers that they've relied on Front for is being able to connect a customer experience even between team members located in like Chicago or New Jersey and Costa Rica or, in different parts of the globe. And so I would imagine that the ability to collaborate through powerful tools is going to be a must in the logistics space, regardless of whether it's full-blown remote, unlikely, hybrid, I would say likely, or even back fully in the office, because most companies that continue to grow and go global, it's I would guess not the norm that everyone's sitting together in one office.
Yeah, you mentioned Costa Rica or Colombia has become an emerging, there's a number of companies that provide dedicated offshoring, nearshoring, I think is the term they like to refer to it as, of using Colombia as this sort of back office workflow center to do things like track and trace, load entry, just very basic work that still needs humans to be involved in it. So, well, LB, I really enjoyed the conversation. Wish you the best of luck as we continue through this. Look, optimism is, I'm very optimistic. I'm a founder. I'm just naturally engineered. I think though at times founders are bipolar in the sense that it's either really up or really down. There is no in between.
I would say that's
really
accurate.
Up and away. I have one last question for you. Working as someone who comes into businesses, works closely with founders, but you're on the operational efficiency side of things, on the optimization side of things. What is the most challenging part of working with a founder?
Focus and prioritization. So I think,
can't do it all.
Can't do it all.
That, right?
I mean, I think like I could never be a founder of a tech company. So I have so much admiration for innovation meets passion, sort of like the chutzpah or the fortitude you have to create and found your own company is incredible. And I also know that at least the founders I've worked with are they want people to be happy. They want the business to be thriving. They want customers to be uber successful. And they kind of want to do a lot of things all the time. And so I think that one of the most important things once you start to reach a certain scale is that I'm a big believer focus breeds excellence. And so having the guts to say no or to intentionally deprioritize things, I think is an art and a skill, and something that if you don't have that as a founder, you got to hire in folks who do and can counterbalance you.
I think it's hard for, at least I'm a founder. It's hard. It's certainly hard for me, challenging for me. But I remember, I always remember this when I have this tendency to want to go break something that somebody optimized because I want it my way. Is I remember I'm the largest shareholder of the company, so if I, at the end of the day, I want people to protect my investment that are doing the work that people like yourself are doing, which is optimizing the operation so that I don't break it, because I'd hate to see my investment go elsewhere. But it is still fun living in a business with success, and certainly wish you, LB, and the folks at Front success for the rest of the year. How can people best reach out to you guys if they'd like to discuss opportunities?
Yeah, that is a great question. You can go ahead and start with me, lb.harvey@frontapp.com, and I will route the conversation to the appropriate team members.
Using Front, I'm sure. Well,
Using
LB, thank
Front.
you for your time today.
Craig, thank you so
Take
much.
care.
Great to get to spend some time with you.
All right.
Bye.
See you. Bye.